Imagine the 15th century, European art steeped in religious motives, and suddenly an artist emerges who dares to cross all boundaries. His name is Hieronymus Bosch, and he becomes a pioneer of genre painting, introducing the world to scenes of real life. However, in all his scenes of earthly life, precise, realistic narration is combined with now incomprehensible elements of symbolism, uncharacteristic of genre painting in its modern understanding. One such scene is a painting depicting a wandering magician charlatan entertaining an audience with thimble rigging. He stands at the center of a scene that could unfold in any town square, surrounded by his devilish entourage. A basket-dwelling owl and a little dog dressed in a costume with a hat reminiscent of devil's horns. If anyone tries to accuse him of illegal methods of earning, the magician might have a good excuse: a hoop for the dog to jump through. He could innocently claim, "See, I perform with the little dog. It jumps skillfully through the hoop." All fair. History has not preserved the original titles of the paintings that Bosch gave to his works. The titles we know were fixed by catalogs. Thus, the title of this painting, The Conjurer, is conventional. The earliest surviving depiction of a similar scene with a magician appears in a work from 1460, painted by a pupil of Masaccio. It also features a little dog jumping through a hoop. In a graphic work presented as an apparent copy of Bosch, it is written, "There are many thieves in the world who perform tricks and show people unusual things on the table. Do not trust them, because when you are relieved of your purse, you will regret it." The authorship of this work, attributed to Bosch, remains disputed. It is most likely a copy of his original. Copies were made more than once, and we will return to some of them, as they include interesting additional elements. Meanwhile, let's examine the details of the painting considered closest to the original work. The magician deftly demonstrates his tricks, mesmerizing the spectators. The focus is on his table, strewn with the tools of his trade, fascinating the curious crowd. In front of him, a spectator peers at the table to unravel the magician's cunning manipulations. The highly realistic nature of this scene, where each character is endowed with a vivid individual trait, where people's clothing and details of the setting accurately reflect the everyday color of Bosch's era, is suddenly disrupted by one strange detail. Enchanted by the magician, the spectator is puzzled at how a frog could leap from his mouth, and here comes a second one. This fantastic detail invades the real narration and imparts a special tone to the genre scene. The frogs likely illustrate the saying "to swallow a frog," symbolizing excessive credulity and naivety, and it echoes the ancient fable of the frog invited by a stork to its home and then eaten. Bosch gives a direct nod to this legend. In the upper left part of the painting, in a round opening of the wall, we see a stork's nest and the beak of this cunning bird. The stork is depicted above a thief attempting to steal a purse, as if supporting the image, enhancing it, and making us ponder. The magician and the thief seem to be partners. His gaze appears directed to the heavens, to spiritual heights, but in reality, his thoughts are on how to pick the pockets of his neighbor. The appearance of the frog from the spectator's mouth has not only folkloric, but also biblical resonances. In the Bible, specifically in the book of Revelation, Apocalypse, of the New Testament, frogs are mentioned in the context of a vision described in chapter 16. In verses 13 and 14 it says, "And I saw 3 unclean spirits like frogs coming out of the mouth of the dragon, out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet. They are demonic spirits that perform signs, and go out to the kings of the whole world to gather them for the battle on the great day of God Almighty." In this passage, frogs symbolize unclean spirits that come forth to gather the rulers of the world for participation in the final battle. These images are filled with symbolism and are meant to emphasize spiritual impurity and deception. Frogs here are embodiments of demonic spirits that seduce and mislead people, preparing them for the great battle. The frog sitting on the table, right under the open mouth of the old woman, seems to unfold the scene in time. Foolishness and deception have come into the present from the past, and they will repeat in the future, as the crowd of townspeople depicted in the background of the painting is passive to what is happening, calmly waiting for their turn to be fooled. Let's return to the thief. The glasses on his long nose, a frequent attribute of Bosch's demons, indicate cunning and false perception. He wears a layman's hat, but the clothing of a Dominican monk. In the political interpretation held by some researchers, the artist naively evaluates the activities of the Habsburgs in Flanders, the artist's homeland, and the Dominicans supporting them. On the other hand, it might simply indicate that his clothing is stolen. Next to him stands a cult servant, equally engaged in deception. Her presence in the crowd symbolizes criticism of the church and its servants. A nun, as a symbol of purity and devotion, should not be part of this process, but her participation in this scene hints that even church figures can succumb to temptations. This reflects the ideas of the Devotio Moderna movement, which inspired Bosch. Devotio Moderna condemned corruption and hypocrisy in the church, emphasizing the need for a more personal and sincere faith. The nun, captivated by the magician, shows that even those who should be paragons of righteousness can be tempted, highlighting human weakness and the necessity for true personal spirituality. The scene symbolizes the schemes and tricks of the devil, lying in wait for the gullible in crowded places, at fairs, enticing with entertainment and temptations. The artist depicted the magician as a typical criminal luring his victim. This is reflected in a number of Flemish proverbs. For example, "He who lets himself be fooled by tricks loses money and becomes a laughingstock for children." Another well-known proverb from Bosch's hometown goes, "No one is as foolish as he who wants to be a fool himself." The child with a windmill in hand beside the deceived person emphasizes the character's folly, the wind in his head the reason for his gullibility. Meanwhile, the child observes the frogs coming out of the victim's mouth with a curious, almost pleased expression, as if he understands what's happening and laughs at the credulous adult. One of the spectators clearly noticed the thief's tricks. He is pointing a finger at him, trying to draw the attention of his companion. But the woman is clearly not interested in that. She is more intrigued by the man's arm around her shoulders. The smile on her lips shows that she is occupied with more pleasant dreams. The man in green likely noticed what is happening as well, but he finds it amusing, and he has no intention of helping the unfortunate person. This character type, by the way, appears in other Bosch paintings as well. He often plays the role of a negative character. Let's return to the magician and examine the owl in his basket. In medieval iconography, owls often symbolized darkness, ignorance, and occultism. They were nocturnal creatures associated with secret knowledge and danger. In this context, the owl may represent perverted wisdom and knowledge used for malicious purposes. The presence of an owl in the magician's basket suggests that he possesses dark and dangerous knowledge, which he uses to deceive and manipulate others. Interestingly, owls are significant symbols in Hieronymus Bosch's work and frequently appear in his paintings. They appear in strange and whimsical contexts, adding layers to their symbolism. In our modern society, the owl is commonly seen as an embodiment of wisdom and tranquility, but in Bosch's world, the owl is a symbol of threat and caution, an embodiment of the devil. For example, in his famous triptych, The Garden of Earthly Delights, on the left panel where Bosch depicted Eden before the fall of Adam and Eve, we see an owl in an unusual pink structure resembling a fountain. Even though sin should not yet exist, as Adam and Eve have not yet tasted the forbidden fruit, we still see unusual, unnatural creatures emerging from the water, and at the bottom left, a cat holding a dead mouse in its teeth, next to a strange creature already consuming its prey. The owl in the hole, peering from the darkness, carries an omen of what is to come, symbolizing evil and the fall of Adam and Eve. The fountain of life is the source of all life, and the owl compromises this pure image of the fountain. It is a symbol of blindness, darkness, heresy. Located at the base of the fountain, the owl speaks of the sinfulness at the beginning of any life. This emphasizes the notion that danger for humanity was lurking even in paradise. You can find more details about this in the previous episode about Bosch, the link to which is in the description of this video. Let's continue examining Bosch's owls. Another owl is in the very nest of debauchery, and yet another owl in the central part of the triptych modestly sits and is almost unnoticeable against the backdrop of this amusing cat. The owl is perched on the head of a nun in the painting Concert in the Egg. We see an owl in the central part of the triptych, the Temptation of Saint Anthony. It is perched on the head of a creature with a snout. Another owl hides in a crevice of a column in the central part of the triptych. What would the ship of fools be without an owl? There it is, nestled at the top in the tree's crown. Here is the owl, a silent witness to St. Jerome's prayer, hiding on a stump and observing. Here, the owl sits on a branch, watching the return of the prodigal son. In general, the owl was used as a lure to catch other birds, and therefore could be a symbol of temptation or deception. Most often, this bird symbolized the soul of a person dwelling in sin. Bosch was not the only one to depict the owl as a symbol of something otherworldly. For example, in one illustration for Dante's Divine Comedy, owls are symbols of the afterlife. 3 of these birds sit on the gates of hell, symbolizing death and the evil lurking there. Sometimes, the painting is considered a critique of religious clerics, and the focus on the frog is seen as a reference to the church ritual of exorcism, casting out the devil. From this perspective, the Conjurer is not just a humorous scene but a mockery of the clergy. Just as the fake magician tricks the spectators, the false clergy absolves sins for money. The Conjurer, dressed in a red robe, resembles papal cardinals. His table is perceived as an altar, and the deceived people as a congregation missiled by ritual. After all, the 15th century church allowed itself many things under the guise of spirituality. On the other hand, there is an opinion that the painting is a complex illustration on the theme of tarot cards. The man in the red dress is the magician from the major arcana. In this case, Bosch's table in the painting also takes on the interpretation of the table from the magician tarot card. This is supported by images of alchemical and astrological symbols in his other works, as well as characters from tarot cards that came to Europe from Egypt and India in the 14th century. The tall black hat is a traditional attribute of the Conjurer, but also of a wealthy person or aristocrat. Let's recall Jan van Eyck's The Arnolfini portrait. Again, this is argued by those who interpret the painting politically, believing that Bosch is pointing to the Habsburgs oppressing the Flemish and using the country's wealth. It is believed that the original Bosch painting has not survived, and this is the most accurate copy, containing details characteristic of the master, egg, the hidden owl in the magician's basket, but relatively primitive in its depiction of the background. The walls. It is housed in a museum in Saint-Germain-en-Laye. It is suggested that in the original, the drawing might have been inscribed in a circle, while the copy is rectangular. Bosch wanted to show society's vices as if in a mirror, to examine them under a magnifying glass. We can recall other paintings inscribed in a circle in Bosch's work. Such are, for example, scenes from the Passion of Christ and a pelican with chicks, the reverse side of the panel Street John on Patmos, or the extraction of the Stone of Madness, or the crowning with thorns. A later copy, kept in a private collection in California, is made in a similar manner. There are other copies as well, in total, about 5 variants. The copies mentioned here have elements not presented in the painting from Saint-Germain-en-Laye, but which are worth mentioning. Here we see a gallows. The gallows repeatedly appear in the background of Hieronymus Bosch's works, and quite likely were present in the original. The gallows are a clear indication of punishment and inevitable death or deception. Possibly, this is a reminder not only of the earthly court, but also the higher, divine. And here, let's look at the gate of the animal pen. They can be viewed as a transition to the spiritual world. We see a bull with a book. This is the traditional depiction of the evangelist Luke and his gospel. It can also be noted that he, or the 3 at the table, is separated. They are in the light, from the magician and the crowd, who are in the dark background. Some are on the true spiritual path, while others are occupied with the transient and false. The plot of this scene has many interpretations, including even an astrological one. Regardless, Bosch masterfully uses every element of his work, making it not just a depiction of street entertainment. Bosch here draws inspiration not from traditional biblical legends, but from the everyday life that surrounded him. Traveling performers, musicians, healers, beggars, jesters, and actors were an important part of medieval society. Moving from one town to another, they not only entertained people but also served as a kind of living newspaper, bringing news from the outside world. These figures were an integral part of fairs, carnivals, and even religious celebrations, despite often being at the lower rungs of the social hierarchy. They preserved and passed on folk knowledge, folklore, and traditions of carnival culture. However, during the Renaissance, attitudes towards them began to change. Representatives of new science and objective knowledge began to perceive these characters as symbols of medieval ignorance. Along with wandering monks, they were considered dark people, bearers of superstitions. During this time of change, when, in the words of Sebastian Brandt, the world is plunged into night and darkness, they were seen as a hindrance to new knowledge illuminating the path to the future. Foolishness, associated with the departing social forces, became a symbol of evil. Erasmus of Rotterdam, in his Praise of Folly, writes that folly rules the world, creating and maintaining states, religion, and governance. The solution, according to Brandt, is to send these jesters and fools on the ship of fools to the mythical land of Fooland, as described in his poem. Bosch, being older than his contemporaries Brandt and Erasmus, in his early works anticipates their attitude towards the departing culture. His work, The Conjurer, can be seen as a didactic satire. He sarcastically depicts the characters of the scene, highlighting their cunning, naive curiosity, and foolishness, using mocking humor that maintains the genre character of the scene. It's a profound social critique, veiled under the guise of a simple spectacle. Bosch reminds us of the importance of being attentive and critically thinking about the surrounding world, so as not to fall victim to deception and manipulation. The direct depiction in genre scenes of earthly life and the striving to comprehend in them the foundations of human existence at a time when such comprehension was possible exclusively within the framework of the religious picture can be explained only by the artist's specific place in contemporary culture. Clearly, the lack of strong ties to any official art school allowed Bosch to immediately step over the traditions of medieval art and pose in his paintings questions that troubled the minds of his contemporaries, Brandt, and after him, Erasmus. Like them, he initially approaches these questions with a humanistic criterion, viewing all that is dark and ugly in life as a result of human folly and short-sightedness. A quarter of a century before the appearance of The Praise of Folly, Bosch anticipated the skeptical philosophical idea of this work. Folly rules the world. However, behind the humanistic plan of his works lies a more complex attitude to the recreated images of folly and madness of the world than that of the first European humanists. Bosch's worldview still has roots in the depths of medieval consciousness. Human folly and madness are closely intertwined in it with the theological idea of sin. Thank you for watching this video to the end. I would love to hear your thoughts and interpretations in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new episodes about grey art. See you next time.